Now into the third round of the FA Cup. The scrapping of replays becomes more detrimental to smaller clubs than ever before. What more should Premier League clubs be doing to compensate smaller clubs who no longer get the opportunity for a replay against one of the big boys?
Scrap EPPP. Next question.
Is it as simple as that?
It is as simple as that, isn't it?
Well, unpack that for those who may be not sure of the details.
So the Elite Player Performance Plan, or whatever it's called, is that what it stands for, Andy?
Yes, it is.
It is essentially completely gutted and strangled smaller clubs around the country because it stops them being able to hold on to young prospects, academy players, young talents, etc., and get a fee for them because the limitations of how far away you get to be from your local club has been scrapped. So, for example, in simple terms, if it's a really good bunch of 2 or 3 players coming through at not Portsmouth, that would never happen. Plymouth, they would previously have been stuck in their academies at Plymouth learning their trade and being assets to Plymouth Argyle until a certain amount of time, in which case it would take a fairly decent amount of money for a bigger club to come in and prize them away, therefore giving much needed funds to that club. Occasionally it was settled by a tribunal. Some people had a problem with that because it wasn't ever really that much money, but it was certainly more money than they get now, because now they get fuck all, because as soon as a player of any age becomes a prospect, they can go to an academy anywhere in the country. And that was part of the concessions that the Premier League strangleholded the Football League into by giving them more money for the pyramid generally. Andy, is that correct?
Yeah, and it's fundamentally flawed because obviously it's sold as taking the best players to elite level and getting them the best coaching, etc., etc. What it actually means in reality is the biggest clubs hoarding all the talent, most of which they'll kick to the curb.
Exactly, and that is relevant to this chiefly because it's not just the fact that replays. So people who listen to this maybe from a different country don't know too much about the FA Cup. Just to give a very, very quick overview. The replay is important traditionally for smaller clubs in the FA Cup because if they are able to hold a big team to a draw at their own stadium, they then get to play at the Premier League stadium and take a large percentage of the revenue from the gate receipts from that game. So
or vice versa and get it on TV.
Exactly. So it's not a exaggeration to say that if a small non-league team got to play at, say, Old Trafford or Anfield or something like that, or got a big game on TV, as Andy says, that could be their budget for the next 3 or 4 seasons. It's much less likely to happen now because we're not doing replays in the FA Cup. But this is the tip of the iceberg because it's only one example of how smaller teams are continually being shafted by the top end of the game who don't do enough to compensate smaller clubs generally, not just in this FA Cup lens.
And of course, the clubs who complain the most about FA Cup replays being a thing when they were still a thing are the ones who could cope with it the most because they've got a massive squad. Yeah. they don't have to play.
They also should have won the game in the first place.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, okay, fine. Just to play, Mr. Advocate for a minute.
Yeah, bring it, please.
Often on this podcast, we say footballers, particularly top-end footballers, are playing too many games. Mm. So this is one area where...
But those particular players don't have to play that game.
Yeah, but that's not the point, though, is it, Andy? They might play the game. So you can't say, oh, well, as long as the manager doesn't pick them, it's not going to happen. So
but this,
you can understand why you want to scrap replays. And also, Andy, do it for your country. Think about England in the World Cup in the
Because that's always the Premier League's argument, and it's always a completely false one.
I hate the Premier League for it, but I think the two do align on this point. So, again, moaning about there being too much football, okay, fine, we'll scrap replays and scrap two-legged affairs in the League Cup semi-final, by the way, as well. That's a different point. This is a little nugget for those who make that argument, surely.
But it's smaller than a nugget. It's a crumb of a nugget.
And it's also not relevant for the smaller teams because the smaller teams don't play 60, 70 games.
Yes, but you know what I'm talking about. When Rodri said, we play too many games, everyone in the studio was like, yeah, totally.
But these were pre-existing games. The fact that the calendar is chock full is not because of the odd FA Cup replay.
Yeah, and it's also, as Andy rightly says, the FA Cup and the FA Cup replays and the tradition of it predates all this other new stuff. And you've got to be very careful, and I'm just going to say it again, I know it's become a kind of annoying catchphrase for a certain section of the listenership of this show, but it's about as ever, the price of everything and the value of nothing. The reason that there's too much football being played, and you're right to bring that up, and that's a point we all agree with, isn't because of the FA Cup and its replays. It's because of things like the Club World Cup. It's because of an expanded Champions League. It's because of FIFA and UEFA's power struggle of having as many games as possible, making the World Cup bigger, making the Euros bigger, introducing all these other competitions. That's the reason. And if the English football establishment feel like the only way they can combat this effectively is to start setting fire to their own traditions, well, it's not going to last very long, is it? It's going to be a race to the bottom, and they're going to be out of luck anyway.
But I think
so. We have to be careful and mindful of that type of stuff as well.
But I think as well, Luke, we need to get into Clive's actual question, which is what more should Premier clubs be doing to compensate smaller clubs? The EPPP point is a really good one.
Well made. Yeah.
I think as well, in terms of loans, and I guess this kind of relates to the same thing, they could be more helpful and less prescriptive. Now, again, I think that's another thing that's not going to happen because the biggest clubs, all Premier League clubs, really have a very narrow view of responsibility to the game as a whole. So now to get a Premier League player, a Premier League clubs player, not necessarily a Premier League player, I suppose, a younger player from a Premier League club on loan as a League One or League Two club, you need to give a full presentation on, how you're going to use them, guarantees of how much you're going to use them. So we're getting perilously close to where Premier League clubs are essentially picking League One and League Two teams. And that's outrageous, really.
It happens a lot when you see it happened with Portsmouth when they got promoted out of League One. I think possibly when they got promoted out of League Two, a lot of loan players, massive turnover of players. It made a real difference. And the reason the answer to this is EPPP is because everything else that you think of to help out smaller clubs is charity. Rather than actually building back in a fabric that works, and for the reason being, if you are a team that is in a pretty heavily populated conurbation where you can really go out into the community and start fostering young talent. For example, something that has happened in South London famously in recent generations. It's been a real hotbed of young players.
That's right.
Everyone knows who they are. If you were a team like, not even a Crystal Palace, because Crystal Palace are obviously a Premier League team, but if you were a team kind of a bit further down the pyramid from Crystal Palace, but you're in that area, you could sustain yourselves as a working financial model, something that is severely lacking in the lower league of football in this country and has been for some time now, by being able to ring fence that 90-minute rule where you can't go to an academy outside 90 minutes around from where you are. And when the Premier League teams do come in, when the player reaches a certain age, they have to pay. And there's nothing wrong with that. The only reason it got abandoned is because the Premier League held the Football League to ransom.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
we will give you this money. Yes, we will ensure this trickle-down thing from all the money in the Premier Leagues as a very successful model.
And this
but in
FA
return, we want this. And the Football League had no choice but to say yes.
Yeah, and this FA Cup thing is just a different branch of the same tree, isn't it? Basically.
Because it suits them. They're basically... Because, it wouldn't necessarily happen, but it has happened in the past. A big team would just pull out the FA Cup like Man United did.
And this is...
we can't play it anymore. It's too many games.
It's so funny how we still mention that. And that goes about...
Because it was so shocking.
Well, it was. And
Yes.
that goes with regards to the traditions and all. And some people, I think... you always say, look, that old phrase, the price of
everything, the value of
nothing. And I think, the FA Cup is the oldest cup competition in the world, and it is worth preserving that.
Of course it is.
And there are some things that are some traditions, they come and go. But this one is, and I think you're right. The fact is that when Manchester United did not play in the FA Cup, what was it, 25 years ago now?
Yeah,
give or take.
Around that.
We still reference it.
Yeah, but I think that's also a nod to the fact that it was incredibly damaging, and it has damaged the FA Cup long term. I think it really has.
What's happened is the Premier League is so successful. Yeah. It's a beast, right? And it's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing for all the reasons that we know about, but we enjoy watching it, and football's amazing, and it's brilliantly marketed and everything like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a success story like that. But if it's done off the backs of other people missing out endlessly, it needs to be looked at. And what's happened with the FA Cup is not just this. I mean, Clive's right to bring it up, but there's other things that have just picked around the margins of it. Oh, the final was played at 5, and it's played a week before the end of the Premier League season now, and it's played at the same time Premier League games get played, and the semi-final is at Wembley. All this stuff that's been kind of picked at in the margins when it's all put together, it just serves to devalue it.
Yeah, by the way, just for clarity's sake, semi-finals have been played there years ago, and also it was the last game of the season, just before anybody.
It's not going to be this
starts
season, though, Marcus.
Well, indeed. And
The FA Cup final will be the week before the end of the Premier League.
and these are the things that you think should be safeguarded, because do you know what? It's good. It's good to have the FA Cup as the last game of the domestic season. These things are decent. It's not like it's getting in the way and it's a tradition that's hampering us.
It's about platforming and respect,
Yeah, and I do agree, by the way. I know, obviously, I gave the argument, but in terms of replays...
you have to. You have to.
But in terms of the replays and so on...
I thought you were out of order.
We should move on, though. Luke, you've got the next question.
Jam Hands.
Oh, there he is.
Jam Hands on Discord. Very active Discorder.
Oh, yes.
I enjoy his oeuvre immensely.
Uh-huh.
He says, which Premier League players are most in need of a move this January?
Who's going to say Marcus Rashford
Well,
first?
he's the obvious one, isn't he? I had three. I actually had four on my list. And
Go on,
Marcus
I've got
Rashford
a
was on
couple.
there.
Okay, go on.
Well, Rashford has to move.
Rashford, definitely.
It depends whether he can, as Andy would say, find a landing spot, doesn't it?
Can I offer you a Ben Chilwell?
Ben Chilwell's on my list.
Is that right?
It's one before.
Well, it's funny, actually. There's two Chelsea players.
Chuck Wemeka?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
because Maresca, not that long ago, mentioned them both, didn't he? He said these are players that unfortunately didn't play a lot with us in the competitions. And he said, like Chilwell and Carney, probably they're the first ones that will want to leave because they work every day and they want to play. And like, Chilwell, was he 27, 28? It's like, come on.
And they've not been named in certain squads. And Chilwell's had such difficult injuries.
Yes.
The problem for Chilwell particularly is that he's on big money and his injury record is so poor that it's probably quite hard for a club to want to take a chance on him. There always will be someone who will want to, because they'll always tell themselves, Jesus, if he can get going at the top level, he's
a Champions League winner.
He's quality. Chuck Wemeka is just a story of which happens far too often anyway, particularly when it comes to a club like Chelsea. Really exciting young player. What was he came through at Villa or something like that, and was just snapped up and he's on a big long contract and
Goes back to player hoarding, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
It
So
does a bit, yeah.
those two definitely need to move. Rashford needs a move. The other one I had was Anthony.
Yes,
I mean, It's just, I like to take the piss out of him. I think he's probably pound for pound the worst value player in Premier League history.
That's why it's so difficult to move.
Yeah, quite.
Again.
But he does need to go. I mean, it's embarrassing, really, for everyone. I mean, I feel actually a bit sorry for him, especially given the fact that he's had a really tough start to life and he's done so well to get where he is. That's not worked for him. He's not suited to the Premier League. He's too one-dimensional. He seems like a bit of a prat, which isn't necessarily his fault, but it's part of it. And he needs to find somewhere else to go.
Yeah.
There'll be the four players I had on my list.
And with Chilwell too, you think left back for England is up for grabs.
Oh, definitely.
And he was obviously very much in the frame before. Like, get back to playing.
Half a good season of form in the Premier League, and he's in the mix, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Tuchel knows him.
Look, the ones I've got, I'm not convinced any of them have got a massive chance of moving this January. I'm going to start with Emi Buendia, who, of course, was a huge signing for Villa when he came in, but just... It's a different club to the one he came into. Obviously, he's had a major injury as well. And they were really hoping on him to conduct the orchestra, but this was all pre-Morgan Rogers, wasn't it? So really, I think he's a player who could be an effective starter for a Premier League team. It ain't going to happen at Villa. And I say that after the rehabilitation of Luca Dean, who they spent the summer trying to get rid of. They brought in Ian Matson. And Dean's been unbelievable this season.
He's been good.
He's a really good player. Like the circumstances around leaving Everton were crazy.
Yeah, totally. But I think the other ones that I would go for, and again, I think these two have got very little chance of moving clubs. Two who were at Arsenal last season, Eddie Nketiah, because Palace just seems a really bad fit for him. You hope that would be where he spreads his wings. And we know he can be a really effective player off the bench.
He's not really getting in the team, though, is he?
Particularly. And, he's struggling to carve a role for himself. So I don't want to see him just go sideways and to hear no more of him. The other one would be Aaron Ramsdale, who I guess took the move to Southampton out of desperation.
Well, it was either sit on the bench or play.
Yeah. But he was never going to get what he wanted from Southampton.
Goalkeepers never suffer reputationally from doing the situation they're in at the moment, that kind of situation, though.
Yeah, I suppose that's right. And it's weird because really what is required as being England goalkeeper and what's required as being Southampton goalkeeper are two totally different things.
I mean, if he could get a move this January, my goodness, that would be what a rescue that would be. I don't think he will move. I
No,
think
nor do I.
I think he'd be there. I think one player who, I mean, I was going to say Mason Mount, but of course, got the injury and so on, because I thought it was a mad move going there in the first place. But another player I would throw in...
Amorim could be his cup of tea, and he could be
Possibly.
Amorim's cup of tea.
So he can't stay fit though.
Well, there's a problem. And here's another one who might fall into that bracket as well, is Dominic Calvert-Lewin. We know there's a player in there. There's been the odd little moment here and there, but again, the fitness issues and so on. But I think come the summer when he's out of contract, I think there might be a few suitors. And to be honest with you, with an ageing Raul Jimenez and one or two others, I wouldn't be opposed to maybe going to Fulham, because Silva is great, as we know, at picking up a player who's
Probably
maybe,
knows him as well from Everton.
Probably.
I think Calvert-Lewin will end up going abroad, because there are quite a few teams on the continent, not that I'm advertising any other podcast, I would never do that on here, that are interested. And I think when you look at the physical toll on him over the last couple of years, if you get injury after injury after injury, the Premier League is the worst place to try and get your fitness back. I think a move abroad would benefit him, even if it was only for a couple of years.
That's a good shout. Can
Turkish Super League, Andy. Come on.
No, I said a league where you can recover without getting kick loads.
The one I'll just round off with would probably, for different reasons, probably Mateus Cunha. Stock's very high. Doable contract.
Oh, interesting.
Teams would probably want him.
I thought about him, but I think he's got a part to play for Wolves. I think with
he has, but I mean the point is his stock's so high that he's at the very, very apex of probably what he can get as a big contract at a bigger club.
I suppose
right now.
That's the question, though, whether you're talking about contract and making the most financially out of your career or getting the most sports-wise out of your career. Because if we're talking about the latter, he's already in the right place. We've seen throughout his career that he likes to be Prince of the Realm. He likes to be the best player in the team. He is that at Wolves, and he could be that at Wolves for a couple more years.
You don't want to be the best player in the Championship. That's the problem.
Oh, but I think Wolves. I think they'll stay up. And
I agree with you.
Yeah,
they're out of the relegation zone by one goal as we record this show.
Yeah. And was it one of his goals?
It probably would have been.
Right then.
More than likely, yeah.
Andy, you've got the next question.
Yes, from Chris on Instagram, and I haven't put him up to it, I promise. Just say the question, Chris. Despite José Mourinho not being a consideration for the Everton job, do you think he has what it takes to be a firefighter manager at the bottom of the Premier League? Oh, we're back on a Big Sam's. Yeah. The Moises.
I'm sort of unsure of this, because Mourinho, we've not seen him have this type of job. However, if Mourinho, and it is a big if, can really get his claws into a club, he can galvanise them. It wasn't that long ago at Roma. I mean, look what they did there. Now, it was a very different sort of position, but when he gets everybody around him and he makes people believe, then it is a possibility. But I'm just not sure that he would, A, be attracted to that, and B, have the patience for it. He certainly would inspire people. If he walked in, I think players would be like, bloody hell, that's José Mourinho. And he still he still has a bit of that. In the Premier League, so, yeah, ultimately, I'm sitting on the fence. I'm not sure. And I need one of you to convince me either way.
I think the Premier League is the only place that this works. I don't think it works in any other league. Ooh, say, if you went to like a struggling German team or French team or Spanish team, say if you took charge of Valencia, that would emphatically not work.
Because they've got no money.
Yeah, that as well. Never a consideration for Jose. He's got plenty. It's fine. But I think when you look at his relationship to the Premier League and how much it flicks his switch, I think he ends up coming back for probably, I don't know whether firefighter is the right term, but a lower half of the Premier League job, because he's burnt every bridge and people know he's not the coach that he was.
But he can galvanise people, can't he? He can. The whole siege mentality. It's still in him.
Exactly. When you were talking about what he did for Roma, you're absolutely right. And it's what you expect from Mourinho nowadays. If you expect him to be the guy who's going to win you the league or whatever, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. I think that moment has been and gone. And the days that a PSG or a Bayern were interested in are completely gone. But having said that, his sheer strength of personality was amazing. As I think you're both aware, my younger son is a Roma fan, and he's still sad that Mourinho got sacked. And I said to him, but hang on, by the end of it, the results were poor, the football was rubbish. And he's like, who cares? He's like, he fought for this club like no one else. And I think that's what people need to feel from him. That's what Fenerbahce feel from him at the moment. Remember, Fenerbahce been the coach in Ismail Kartal, who got 99 points in the league last season. There is no way Mourinho is coming in and doing better than that. And there was never any sense, any realistic sense from people who watch Turkish football, that Fenerbahce are going to beat Galatasaray. So Galatasaray got a really good team at the moment and they've got a really good coach. But what does he do? He gets in there and goes, oh, it's a conspiracy. Everyone's against us. And that's what he does. And you know what? Can you think of anyone better to build a siege mentality when you're near the bottom of the league?
You kind of had me there believing for a moment there, but when you mention all this Fenerbahce stuff and he's going absolutely mad and almost like conspiracy theory stuff, I think,
it's proper Trumpist.
I suspect that Luke is going to give a different side to this.
Well, I think it's very easy to see those qualities that would relate and translate across to a team struggling. But I think the devil's probably in the detail. The tension and the pressure is a lot higher in that situation. You're probably less likely to be able to buy players as well. I don't actually know if Mourinho's any good at buying players anymore anyway, because I think the players that he's used to working with are above his pay grade now, really.
I mean, he always needed a strong sporting director.
Sure.
I think, rather than being left in charge of that himself.
And I don't know who. I mean, I'm not really an expert in sporting directors, but I don't know how many good sporting directors there are in the bottom half of the Premier League, and whether they'd be able to chuck money at it anyway. Because if you think that, PSR and stuff like that comes into play, sad. I mean, I would love to see him come in at a club that's big, but in the Premier League, but really struggling. So, I mean,
Southampton.
Say Man United.
I said big. Southampton.
Get him back there.
In actual fact, the only barrier to him probably going to Everton would be the Freaking Group. If they were owned by someone else, I could see that happening. Because people who buy clubs like Everton are generally a bit insane.
What would you think about that?
I'm going to tell you.
Sure.
I can see him really tapping into the culture and people loving him. And I think actually what Andy's describing there with his son kind of really strikes to the core of not just what Mourinho is all about, but what actually a lot of public figures in modern life are all about. It's about gut feeling. It's about instinct. It's about you can't explain. Yes. It's almost like a faith position why you like someone. If you sit down with someone and say, why do you like Donald Trump? He's done all these terrible stuff, all these terrible things, and said all these awful things. In many ways, it's actually just the wrong question to be asking. So I realise I actually haven't come on to answer the question. I can see, it's a hypothetical, but I can see reasons why he would be able to galvanise a team and get enough out of them to get them out of the Premier League relegation race. And I can see why, I can 100% see him in a post-match interview after rescuing a team from relegation saying this is the best achievement I've ever had, and everyone loving him for it, and then it started to go to shit halfway through the next season and him going.
But he needs to learn when to leave now.
But I do think a lot of the principles in delivering success in a competitive environment are the same wherever you are. There's ultimately the ambition is the same thing. You want to win games, you want to be, win more than you lose, pick up points, and obviously your realistic ambition is different because you're not going to take everything to win the Premier League. But I think he can translate a lot of these things across. But I mean, he'll just want massive money. He'll want to be massively backed in the transfer market. He'll complain about that when he doesn't get it. To me, it just feels like it might not work. But I don't think he hasn't got what it takes. I think the more likely outcome with Mourinho now, to kind of take this question to a slightly different way, different area, the more likely thing to happen now is his next job is going to be an international job. I think the door is all but closed, really.
Oh, don't say no. Don't say no. I mean, that's at the heart of all of this. Whether it makes any sense is almost peripheral to the question.
Sure,
it'd just be fun.
But Andy, there's a Venn diagram here, and one of the circles is jobs that are available to José Mourinho.
Yes.
And one is jobs he will accept with his ego. And that crossover is getting smaller and smaller every year.
Oh, I think it's less small than it was a couple of years ago. I think he's open to coming back to England and he realises it's not going to be one of those top jobs anymore. And one last hurrah in the Premier League.
But a big historied club, that's what he would like.
Yeah, totally.
Newcastle, possibly.
No.
I mean, come on.
No. I think that ship sailed.
All right. Well, that's the question. What's the next one?
Well, look, I don't think we're going to pop up in Newcastle anytime soon. Okay, we've got this from Waterproof Hair on Discord. Now, old Waterproof has asked, how long do you think the PSR rules will remain in their current form? Given that the big six teams they were originally designed to protect are now being hamstrung by them, how likely do you think it is that they'll change in the near future? Well, they are changing, aren't they?
Yeah. Look, I've got a slight issue with the question. Andy might put me right, as he usually does. I don't necessarily think that the PSR rules were originally designed to protect the big six teams. I think they were originally designed to stop a very, reputationally embarrassing situation where a big, high-profile team goes out of business.
It's to protect all clubs, you could argue.
Yeah. And they are changing. So for those who don't know, what's happened at the moment, the PSR rules that the Premier League have state that a club is allowed to lose £105 million across 3 seasons, posting a loss of up to £105 million across 3 seasons. There's detail, and it changes slightly if you've spent some time in the Championship, but that's ultimately what it is. And the points deductions for Everton, Nottingham Forest, and maybe for some other teams in the near future, is because they've contravened that. The Premier League clubs have voted, I think, to accept moving across to a more UEFA style model, which is like a percentage of your value as a club.
Which again is updated FFP, because they
don't call it FFP anymore either.
No. PSR was built on the original FFP rules, really.
Yeah,
which was only 30 million over 3 seasons that you could lose.
And there is a shred of nobility in the original FFP rules, right? Which is that, for example, it's not ideal, obviously, for a big billionaire oligarch to come into a club, pump a load of their own money into it, and then leave with all these overheads. And then you're left to pick up.
But no one ever talks about the second half of that sentence, do they? Because I guess where Waterproof Hair's question is coming from,
Mr. Hare, actually,
Mr. Hare, saying given that the big 6 teams that were they originally designed, the rules were originally designed to protect the big 6. I guess that comes from that sort of like, say, Newcastle perspective, that feeling that they've got all that money, but they can't spend it. There's never any sense of what happens if they walk out and leave you with all these financial obligations. What happens if Abramovich were to have walked out and left Chelsea with all these financial obligations?
Which he kind of did.
Yeah, no one ever thinks about it from that angle, though, still, do they?
It's a good point. And I would also chuck in there, and maybe you guys disagree, it'd be interesting to get your take on it, that actually the current PSR rules are kind of working. They work in terms of they're
affecting clubs' behaviour,
and they're also the crucial part of it for me is they are also not imposing further financial penalties. They're imposing sporting penalties, which massively affect it. So the punishment,
and it's just and right, because it is affecting how the sport rolls out.
And to follow up on something that I also don't think gets talked about enough when it comes to financial fair play, PSR, whatever you want to call it, sustainability, if you like, is that, it's very, very regularly overlooked that some clubs are just bigger than other clubs. Yeah. And it's always been the case that, for example, go back as far as you want to remember, anyone living can properly remember, Liverpool and Man United have always been bigger clubs than, whatever you want to pick, Hull, right? There's nothing inherently unfair in that. It's that those clubs have been run in a certain way. They've got a massive fan base. They've built that fan base over decades.
Geographically in cities and all that kind of stuff.
That stuff happens. So we've got to be pretty mindful, I think, of trying to flatten out the quote-unquote fairness for its own sake. But at the same time, the financial rules should be in place to make the game more sustainable, which I'm afraid comes all the way back to the start again, and kind of answers the question in the same way we did with the first question, which is, this is an example of how it protects certain clubs, but it's not the main crux of the issue. The main crux of the issue is the Premier League has basically galloped out the stable door and gone over the horizon with all the money, and occasionally is tempted back to give people a bag of feed here and there. And that's not sustainable. Nothing about the Football League, with a few exceptions, nothing about the Football League, the 72 teams in the Football League, is sustainable.
Agreed.
And it affects everything. It affects conversations we have about Wayne Rooney as a manager. Andy said it yesterday. I said it the week before. Where's he going to go? Where's he going to go that's not a complete basket case? There are very few non-basket case examples in the Football League because of this stuff.
Indeed. But so
something has to be done.
Well, it does have to be done. I mean, ideally you would get in Bill and Ted's phone box and go back and say to the FA, maybe don't sell off the top league and see how you get on. But that's, as you say, the horse has bolted. So, I think with the PSR rules, as you say, 105 million over 3 seasons. With the new UEFA style rules, it's 70%. of your club's revenue.
Turnover, yeah.
And turnover and all that.
And it's 85% of the turnover for teams that aren't involved in European competition.
And there's also a slight exception for teams who've shown quote-unquote good financial records in recent years.
So
there's different caveats.
So they are trying to sort of... That is slightly more skewed towards the bigger sides, isn't it? Because the more you win, the more, you higher turnover, all that kind of stuff. So perhaps, I think it strikes me just on initial thoughts that the PSR rules that are right now in the Premier League are actually slightly better.
Can I have another go at just potentially explain how this could be better?
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that imposing something like a percentage of turnover for a club at all levels of English football in terms of what they can spend is a sensible idea. And I know that people are going to say, well, yeah, but then if you're Man United, your revenues are so high that you can run roughshod over everyone. Well, yeah, you can because of the other shit that they've done.
Yeah.
That the league has done. If you had, this is going to sound farcical now because I'm mentioning it again, if you had EPPP in there, or you had and you had other ways for clubs at all levels to be able to sustain themselves, it wouldn't actually matter, because if you had 70% blanket of your turnover across the board at every level of club, it's an even playing field. Now, if your club in League One is run much better than all the other clubs in League One, well, what's going to happen? You're going to find yourself a championship club, and then you're going to get more revenue. And if you run it again even better, because you've got more revenue, you know what you're doing, you might find yourself as a Premier League club. Then you have even more revenue. And it'll work because it'll be an even playing field. The reason it doesn't work is because nothing about football in this country anymore is an even playing field. And all the stuff underpinning it as a structure has been taken away to favour the big clubs. So, again, in some ways, we're actually talking about the wrong thing here with these questions. They're pertinent questions, but they all sit on a complete bed of sand.
And the other thing is that we're talking about the fact that the details are yet to be worked out. And some very important details are yet to be worked out. So, for example, with this new financial rules model, a lot of, and this is because of more and more American owners, and we talked about Everton in the show yesterday, coming into the Premier League. Because we've got more and more American owners in the Premier League, we're maybe looking at a more American financial model, which on the surface of it looks great, because you look at something like the NBA where you don't have, a Manchester City or whatever, because you simply can't go out and buy success. On the other hand, what a lot of clubs are talking about is like an equivalent of the luxury tax that you would get. So, like, you can go over the top, you just have to pay for it.
Yeah, I find it unhelpful to compare American sport to football, though,
That's so different.
Because there's no pyramid. So actually, there's no real.
No, if you remove like relegation,
it becomes a different principle, and I think it would be generally a good thing that. I'm actually quite for free enterprise. I'm a bit of an internationalist as well. I quite like the idea that you get a lot of influences from all these different countries. People invest in different countries, and I get all that. I think for sport it's slightly different, and I think on balance, it would be a good thing that really wealthy people from the US, from Saudi Arabia, from Russia, from wherever, don't see a country's sporting league as somewhere they can make a load of money or make a load of cultural capital. If you were to put rules in place where actually you can't pull out loads of money like the Glazers, or you can't wash your reputation, or if you do, it's going to cost you a lot of money, and it's also going to be subject to a load of different conditions and rules that you can't circumvent, neither of which has happened really with the Saudis, for example. If you were to impose that, I don't think it makes the Premier League a worse product. I just think it makes it a lot more fair and a lot more... makes people a lot less squeamish to like it, which potentially even strengthens it. So you can't unring a bell. I understand that. It's very difficult to go back to that. But that's really what should be happening, I think. Because I think that the reason the Glazers get involved with United is there's only one reason for that. And they've not been stopped doing it, even though Man United is an amazing historic institution and should be protected. I just think there's a certain element of this in all walks of life in the modern world where, like another example for me would be like BBC Television Centre being sold off, for flats. That's an amazing historical asset. It should be protected in some way, because otherwise we just don't stand for anything. Nothing means anything anymore, because all it comes down to is the price of something. When Saudi Arabia come in and try and literally take over the entire world of boxing and golf. I mean, are we happy with that? I mean, boxing and golf are two sports that a lot of people like. You know, is it right that people can come in and kind of do that? I don't think it is, and I think that applies to this as well. And it's had a massive effect on the fairness, the competition, the relationship that ordinary people have with a community asset where they're from. And we should be more angry about that than we are, I think. And so that's why it's frustrating.
I'll only be happy with it if they pay me to be happy for it. All right, let's have a quick break. Luke Moore, you've got the next question.
Blue Sky. We're going to Blue Sky.
Oh!
Currently one of the only social media platforms we can be, fairly kind of guilt-free about using for now?
Yeah, I don't think there's enough truth on Blue Sky, though, which is why I stick with X.
Well, we'll give Noah the benefit of the doubt. He's posted this on.
All right, Noah.
We'll assume that
what lies is he going to spin on Blue Sky?
We'll assume that he lives his life in truth. Do you think Leicester City will be in the same position right now if they managed to keep hold of Enzo Maresca?
I think they'd be further up the table, quite simply.
Do you?
Yes, because he's an excellent manager. It would appear there would be a continuity there with his ideas and the way he played. They loved. I mean, for crying out loud, what was it? Their Christmas do? Was it Copenhagen when we saw them in the club? And there was a little nod to Maresca on one of the. Did someone bring a bed sheet in or something? You know, that was written somewhere. I don't know, but clearly the players liked him a lot. They were very good in the Championship last season. The bulk of that squad is still there, of course. And again, I was full of praise with what Maresca did at Leicester, as anybody with a pulse would be. Gone to Chelsea, has done much better with that squad than I think people thought what was going to happen in his first stint in the Premier League as a number one. So you have to say that they would be further up the table. They would definitely have more points on the board. Those players liked playing for him. They knew the system. I'm not saying that they would be challenging for Europe. It's hard. But one thing I would say is that I often mentioned that it's difficult when you come up from the Championship. You're used to winning every week and collecting the points and playing in a certain style. And you get to the Premier League and that doesn't really wash. You're playing a different style. Your back's against the walls and all that kind of stuff is very, very difficult. But I think nowadays, though, it has changed slightly. I've seen that with Marco Silva and Fulham. You came up, okay, they spent a few quid, but they came up and they did play more on the front foot. And actually, I think there was a case of, right, now we can do this. I believe it doesn't always work out. Russell Martin at Southampton, of course, nothing, you can't take 100% for everything. But that stat that was from yesteryear in the Premier League, the team from the Championship who comes up and plays the most direct style, if you look at it and you break it all down to the minutiae of details, they are the team that's most likely to stay up. That's not the case anymore. Football has moved on a little bit in this country. And so I think that Maresca, he would find it tough in the Premier League with Leicester. Of course he would. But playing in that style, I think that they would have benefited from that, certainly. They wouldn't have had a sort of regrettable period that they had with Steve Cooper, which clearly didn't click. The players didn't take to him. And that position now, Ruud van Nistelrooy is coming in and is trying to sort of unpick that and bring in his thing. You wouldn't have had that. So that's my thought.
So do we think the reason that Leicester was struggling at the start of this season was because of Steve Cooper? Because I'm not convinced that's the case. I mean, I agree with you partially in that I think that they might have been better off under Maresca, particularly as he was the incumbent coach. But I think
team playing on all playing for the manager, really enjoying the football with a distinct style and identity.
I get that, but look at their squad. Like seriously.
Yeah. Burnley had that with Company. Southampton had that with Martin.
Yeah, but
look. Company has been a game changer. At Bayern, was he able to do that with Burnley's squad in the Premier League?
No, but I think Maresca. I think that you're right. As I say, I'm not saying that they would be in the top half or anything. I just think they would be in a better position. They wouldn't have had that period under Cooper, which was disaster's too strong a word, but it was a failure. Hence, he got sacked. You wouldn't have had that period.
Or you could say that, or you could say he was the coach when it happened.
I'm not slagging off Cooper. I think
there were two. I'm slagging him off if you want. I'm just saying. I think it's open to interpretation how much of an influence he has on that.
But clearly the players didn't like him and it didn't click. So I'm saying that they would have been much more likely to have gotten more points in that period with a manager who they all knew how to play under him. They were all wanting to play like that. He would have tweaked it. Maresca's no fool. Look at him at Chelsea. We have hindsight here, to deal with this question.
I think it's right to say he's no Russell Martin. Having said that, I think there is a limit to what you can realistically do. And we were talking about FFP and PSR in the last section, and Leicester are currently paying the bill for that, and that's where they are. That is the reality of their situation. I'm quite prepared to accept they would have been a bit better off under Maresca, and obviously they would have loved him to stay. I still think they'd have been in the relegation mix.
Okay, so to tackle...
I think you can look at Ipswich, for example, and what Ipswich have going for them amongst all those other relegation contenders. And of course, they're in a completely different situation because they've got promoted in 2 successive years, which means, Fulham were criticised in the past for going out and buying 10, 12 new players in the summer. They simply had to do that. And, Ipswich have been in a similar position coming into the Premier League this year. The edge that Ipswich have over the other teams at the bottom is they have a better coach than any of the other teams at the bottom.
Yeah.
And that does make a difference.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the straight answering of the question, the answer is yes, because Maresca is a better coach than Steve Cooper. But that could be, Marcus, I think you're also right to point out that the same way we talked about this with Rooney yesterday, it's about managers choosing their jobs well and being the right fit for things. And I actually think that you've got to look at the circumstances. The reason Enzo Maresca leaves Leicester is because Chelsea come in for him. And it comes at a time when it comes. And
partly, I think it's partly because Chelsea come in for him, but I think he's going anyway. I think he's going anyway because he knows what's coming. But
I'm thinking about it from Leicester's point of view. They can only react to a situation. Their whole football operation is built around one man, and he's decided to leave. So they have to do what they can do. And it stands to reason that there would be continuity there. There would be stability, or more stability than there's been. But I think also Maresca is still going to have had to answer the questions that Andy's posing of him within, in the context of Martin at Southampton, Company at Burnley. What do you actually do? Like the reason that Burnley got relegated, and the reason Southampton will be relegated, and the reason Leicester may well be relegated, is because you are set up in a certain way to win the Championship, and the gap is big, and what you're rewarded for in the Championship is being a big club, usually with parachute payments, who can afford to have a philosophy with a normally quite an exciting manager, and you essentially not walk the league, but you do really well. I think Leicester's won like 31 games in the Championship. Burnley were amazing. Southampton maybe snuck in there, it's perhaps slightly different. But when you get into the Premier League, bang, what are you going to do now? Well, you either completely rip up what you've done, or you do it in an inferior way against much better teams and get spanked.
But as I say, though, as I was saying moments earlier, that I think nowadays you can have a go at that. And when you have someone like Maresca, who's clearly a well-rounded coach, much more well-rounded than, say, Russell Martin, as the evidence suggests, then I think that, you do some tweaks. But I'm basing a reasonable amount of this on Marco Silva and Fulham because they didn't change it that much.
But they're an exception rather than a rule.
They had
a couple of goes at doing that.
What about Frank's Brentford? What about Frank's Brentford?
There you go, another one. But look,
they were quite direct in their first season.
They were fine, but I'm just saying that the evidence we have with Maresca, I think he would have tweaked it enough for them to be in a better position to finally answer the question directly. Do you think they would be in the same position right now? I think the argument could be is they'd be in a similar position, but I think that they would have a much better fighting chance, and I think that they would be looking to drag other teams in, and they would be thinking, do you know what, we can finish a reasonable sort of mid-table. They would be, I'd say, 14th, 15th, something like that, rather than thinking, bloody hell, we'll bite your hand off for 17th right now.
Yeah, I think they might be 16th rather than 19th or something. With a few more points better off. Yeah, but it's so tough. It is so tough. It's also impossible to answer because it's complete hypothetical.
But that's what we're here for.
Yeah,
we're here for the hypotheticals and the non-hypotheticals. Is this hypothetical? We have some follow-ups with regards to our Andy Gray as the next James Bond shout.
Yeah, we did, and I'm excited to hear from them. But I think we made a mistake last week.
We did.
I thought to myself, Richard Keys is the Bond. Andy Gray is the Q. Yeah. Andy Gray was always using the screen before anyone else. He's a gadget guy. And Keys fancies himself much more as a Bond. Keys, the way he looks after himself, he gets his hair blasted off, gets his hair transplant on his head, the way he carries himself, he thinks he's Bond. I think Andy Gray's quite happy to be Q.
I think in the story of his life, Richard Keys would definitely have prime Sean Connery playing himself.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
similar approach to women as well.
Despite our mistake...
laughing matter.
I'm not laughing
at comparison.
No, I'm looking at some of the correspondence we have.
This very much is a laughing matter.
Yeah, right. So, despite our possible error with regards to this, you've been in touch. Some of you on the Discord have suggested gadgets which Keys could invent for Gray. Kwali has said, how about the deadline day drone? It targets in the nose and assesses their level of accuracy. If it's too low, Andy can choose to unleash a laser on them and deadline them for good.
I mean, I'd quite like that. I think we'd all like one of them, wouldn't we?
Deadline them for good, Andy.
I think you've got to think of Live and Let Die in the Crocodile Farm at a moment like that.
I was thinking about the laser up the Jacksy, which he nearly got.
Oh, yeah.
That's Goldfinger, isn't it?
He's golfing.
Yeah. I mean, answer this question honestly, Andy. In your position as a European football expert, one of the most well-respected voices on European football in the world, would you like to terminate Fab Thingy with a laser? What's his name? Romano. Would you like to terminate Romano?
Would you like to see Andy Gray do it with a Richard Keys invented laser?
I think the only relevant question here is, what is your favourite Bond film? And it's Diamonds Are Forever because Dotton was in it.
There we go. That's a good answer, actually.
Nick Gee says, the offside trap. It's a paralytic dart fired from a wristwatch that allows you to catch someone in a foot race.
I'm not sure Andy would need to use that, would he?
Do you think he's still quick enough?
I think the first yard's in your head, Marcus.
On a Segway, maybe.
Yeah, true enough. Jam Hands is got involved again. The Arteta-tet, a small device that, when attached to the clothing of the target, delivers an electric shock whenever they step outside a designated area. I mean, Richard Keys would like to control that on Arteta specifically. Obviously, that's why Jam Hands has named it that.
But Andy Gray can put it on Richard Keys so that he can't leave the bar.
I don't think there's any danger in that.
No, but I think Andy Gray was one who wants to tie one on more than Keys does. Keys probably wants to go home after a certain point.
I don't know. Whatever Andy's doing, I think you'll find Richard. And it would be the golf club, I hear, in Doha, by the way.
Or right. Coventry City fans could use it on Richard Keys to stop him going anywhere near Coventry again.
Yeah, and more of a defensive thing, I suppose.
The most embarrassing famous fan of a club since Osama bin Laden at Arsenal, I'd say. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you?
I don't think it was embarrassment. I think it was
Jimmy Savile at Leeds?
No,
Jimmy Savile at Leeds. That's the Holy Trinity.
There you go.
Bin Laden at Arsenal, Savile at Leeds, and Keys at Coventry.
There must be some others, but perhaps
probably are.
We're best
I can't
not
think of one
to.
off the top of my head.
Matt finishes with this. The device is called It's Just Fanta.
That's one for you.
It is a tablet that, when dropped into... This is genius. A tablet that, when dropped into tap water, transforms it into a carbonated orange-flavoured beverage.
I mean, that already exists. You could get Fanta syrup for the soda stream.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, but if Marcus was in charge of hospitality at Fulham, that would be the welcome drink, wouldn't
It's just the limit of Matt's ambition here.
I love that, Matt, so much. People would say, what's this? What is this sort of fizzing away from it? And I would say, it's just Fanta. It's just a bit of fun.
You said, I know. And I said, I know. Class.
Oh, dear. Thank you very much for listening to the Football Ramble Mailbag, part of the Acast Creator Network. Luke and I will be back on Monday with Pete and Vish.
Oh, fucking hell.
But it's our favourite weekend and you get to talk about it.
That's true, actually. Yeah, I'm up for that.
You miserable
I'm
old
not on
sod.
Friday next week, and I can't play.
Oh, shut up. Please do send us your responses, opinions and questions for next week's episode. You can follow us on X, Blue Sky, TikTok and Instagram at Football Ramble, and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast.
Why doesn't Andy do Mondays? You never do Mondays, Brassel. Is it in your contract?
He hates Mondays.
Yeah.
He's the Bob Geldof,
of
the piece. Anyway, thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luke.
Cheers.
And thank you, Bob Geldof. See you on Monday.